It's showtime!
Welcome to the podcast Tools, Not Rules, Film Explorer's Editing Collection, Episode 4 with Philippe Ciompi. Film Explorer met the Swiss-British sound designer and dubbing mixer Philippe Ciompi at The Head in Geneva. Together with his tutoring activity at the Royal College of Art London and The Head Geneva, he is also active as picture editor, sound artist and composer, and collaborates with artists and filmmakers in Europe and beyond.
With retrospect, I am able to see that these were things that needed to happen. So there, I think, is hope.
Something that for me was always in the back of my mind, even long before I was working in cinema sound, when I was working with music and recording and stuff like that, I was always very disappointed when things were predictable. As you record a bit of actual sound, even me talking here or something like that, there's a whole array of things that are not predictable, which were non-intentional. The background, the door that just opened a second ago, somebody passing in the background, the ventilation, whatever. All these things, which are very, very complex. And if I start to manipulate a sound recorded in that way, various bits of that complexity comes to light, and of course I use that. Sometimes I want to enhance this bit, this part, sometimes that part, etc., etc. It's a much richer, for me anyway, medium because of its non-predictable nature. The whole development of field recording, thanks to technology that has become available and good, because it was available before, but it was bad. Now it's good and affordable, I mean. You go anywhere, actually, in the street or on the mountain or in the Amazon, you record. In the beginning of my time as a film sound recordist, I found that extremely disturbing and interesting. I want to record this. I try to record this, but it's never that. It's something else. What I get is not what I wanted, is something else. And in the beginning, I was extremely frustrated because it was not going to work in the film that I was working on. And it took me quite a long time to sort of say, yes, but it doesn't work for this, but it is something, and that something has its particular value and interest, and I will use it somewhere else. The funny thing, in my experience anyway, the best sounds that I've recorded in a context for a film never make it to the film. Because they're too strong, they're too specific, they're extremely good sounds, but they don't work in the film. So I have a lot of sounds like that, which are in my library, that I use sometimes, but certainly the original film, they have not been used for it, because it doesn't work. I have a friend who is of the opinion that everybody who works in this field should have all the sounds at his disposal. We shouldn't be like, this is my sound, this is your sound, this is his sound. No. He says those are only the ingredients, and then everybody will cook their own way with those. Yeah? I'm a little bit more private because I'm a bit like, no, this is my sound, sorry. Which is, I'm not particularly proud of that, but I am a bit like that.
Of course, it depends on the project, but you prefer to have a sort of vision and also to have from the director the main ideas behind the project, behind the film project?
When possible, I try to be involved early. If I'm not involved in the shooting, then they come back, do the editing, and depending on the kind of project, then when they have screenings, if I can be there, I will be there and give my input. My approach is really to understand what is the intention, what are the approaches, what is the back story or the various streams that feed the project, which usually I don't know. And then to take all that in account in my thinking to make proposals. I don't find it very productive to just go and do your thing. My principal thing is to talk with usually the director. Depending on when I'm involved in the project, very often, I come a bit later and they have problems. This and that doesn't work. And so I say, okay, well, sometimes we find solutions through the sound, yeah.
Let's take a concrete example, because, about this question, and one was very impressive for us. This is the Andrew cutting leg and
Leg
the dog.
and the dogs, yeah.
We had the impression that in this case is sort of reverse film, in the sense that the sound is really the basis, the structure.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more concretely, for this project in particular, how do you work with Andrew, and how was important your contribution or the discussion about the sound, actually?
Well, Andrew Cutting is somebody very, very special. He's a very determined and strong and loving kind of person. Also very generous, actually. And he comes from the post-punk scene. He comes from the late 80s London scene. So he really has this approach, whatever, let's just do it. And of course, he's got a massive musical culture as well. And so he's extremely good with sound. So a lot of his work, he makes a lot of proposals himself. And then we discuss them, I deconstruct them, reconstruct them, rejig them together, etc., etc. But he's actually, for me, a fantastic person to work with, because he's got such a direct attitude, just like non-sort of conformist attitude. He said, no, I want, he said, but this doesn't work. What is this? And I don't care. I like it. Just let's have it.
It's in the case of Lek and the dog. So about the sound, how was the process? How was your discussion and this decision? And
there was the whole discussion about the voice of the boy, to have him to do all this fake Russian discussion. We work for quite a few years with Jem Feiner as a composer, a music artist or sound artist. They exchange files, then I get them, I remix them. It's a sort of a circular thing like that.
in editing in general, say, okay, the perfect editing is the transparent editing, the editing that you don't see. But in some cases, it's quite important that you see the editing, because it becomes a sort of voice, one of the voices of the film, one of the protagonists sometimes of the film. So in the case of sound, how much you feel important to deliver your signature in a project?
I don't really think consciously about my signature, and I have a very small career as a sound artist. I'm a film sound designer and picture editor mostly. And I do sometimes do a sound piece or something for the gallery, but I'm not developing my sort of voice this particular way. So for me, whether you notice the sound or you don't notice the sound, or whether the sound is obvious or not, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, and I don't really care. What I really cannot bear, what I really don't like, is when somebody tells you the sound has to be this way because that's the way it is. So let's say transparent, invisible, realistic, all that. That is the bit that I cannot take. Because I don't need to be loud or anything, but I want to each time ask the question, the dialectic question. So with this image, this sound is doing something, this other sound is doing something else. Let's discuss, Let's make an artistic decision to have this one artistic, or even, a thought decision, maybe philosophical decision. Are we going to use this one or that one, or another one, or many?
Je n'ai pas encore trouvé les bouleaux argentés. Je pense beaucoup à vous. Manon et Capucine me manquent aussi. Je vous réécris bientôt.
And in comparison with the image, of course, the synchronic level, the synchronic editing, is an entire word as such. You have to put a sound after another, but at the same time, you edit in a sense.
Vertically.
Vertically also the sound. So how is concretely the work with these two dimensions of editing? Yeah. So.
Well, that's a pretty complex question. The first thing to understand is there never is one sound only in real life, yeah? That doesn't exist. There's always a lot of sounds, and there's always a lot of layers of sounds at all times. Now there is a background sound, there's the street, there's the camera, there's you, your breath, our talking, my breath, etc. All these are always present. Now, when you work with sound, theoretically it's a deconstruction of that, where you try to isolate those various elements to be able to manipulate them or to shape them. So it's a reconstruction of virtual spaces with sound, made of environments, made of words, made of music, etc., etc. Well, music is actually not in that exact paradigm. When you put one sound, you put 10 sounds or 20 on the timeline, even if it's only one file. And then the next one, how do all these things relate? Yeah? And of course, then you work with the synchronicity. Do you actually match the camera, or do you decide not to? What's going on the screen? Usually, we work with at least 2 or 3 categories of sound or types of sound simultaneously. The interesting thing is that there's no exact method. Tendentially, the trap in a way is that you are given the sync sound to start with. The location sound is what comes first, usually, when there is location sound. And then you're a little bit like stuck there. If it's well made, it gives a lot of color and intentions already. And then if you want to really go somewhere else, that's when you actually need to work at the picture editing level to decide, no, here the sync sound is going out and we're doing something else, What's interesting with sound, and what's, for me, one of the really important elements, is that we process sound in our day-to-day life and in cinema in a sort of subconscious way. We absorb it, it touches us completely, we're in sound all the time, but we don't analyze it. What's for sure is sound will be sort of noticed only in very special moments. Moments where it's dangerous, a dog, a car, a truck, something like that, or when there are discontinuities. Naturally, we are in a sound space which is continuous. In cinema, you create a sound discontinuity, and this discontinuity triggers your sense of being in a different place, different sense, but usually people have no idea that actually the sound is doing that. These ones are the sort of the ones that you don't notice, but they are there very strongly, but you don't actually, you just take them the way they come. Now, but they are also very dissociated already, yeah? But now, of course, during the editing work, you do separate them, you do challenge the sync sound. I personally like to remind the viewer, listener, that actually everything he or she is seeing is a complete construct. For me, the constructivist element of it is the most fascinating, and also I have no desire to sort of hide it under the carpet, which is supposedly the canon of the classical filmmaking, which I actually don't quite believe, but,
His deprivation foretells our deprivation. I am
Yet what I am, none cares or knows.
I like very much this idea that dissociation actually is the basis of editing. William Burroughs' inner space, the notion of inner space. It's a sort of inspiration. It's something to do also with editing. I don't know. It's something like the place where you want to deconstruct and reconstruct, and I don't know.
For me, the interesting element is the distance between what we see and what we hear. Sometimes they are very close, and it's pretty standard, let's say. And sometimes they go out of each other. What I sort of like is this sort of circulation. You are together, then you go into something very abstract, possibly, or interior in the sound, when the image might be, I don't know, they go different ways. For me, it's a part of this general dancing. I think of it like an architecture in time, in a way. They really breathe. I want the thing to have a different type of breath. Just to explain maybe the method, usually I don't do the things the way that, like, first you deal with a realistic bit, then you do the sound design, which I actually don't quite believe or know what that is, and then you do the mixing, etc., etc. In my case, it's much more like I try to get a sense of the film, possibly the sense of the idea of the film, even before the film. And then usually what happens is I have ideas, I have intuitions. Usually that's where I start. So I start in the middle. And I see it really like putting sort of dots or like pegs. And between them there's a string. And that string is more or less tense. If you have one point here, one point there, between them, even if you have done nothing, there's a tension. My methodology is more like okay, create some moments which are significant. They don't need to be big or strong or whatever, but they are turning points. Sometimes it's just very simple. I see a shot or a scene and I say, I know the sound that we need for this one because I know it, because I have it somewhere in my sleeve. This one that I recorded in China 10 years ago, this one is going here. So the methodology of going through the different layers of work, also to keep it alive, because it's a very work-intensive process. It can be also very tedious in parts. Cinema is, as a form, it's as a finished product, it's fixed. Music and sound, and by essence, is elastic, is fluid. There's no strict chronometric time. My method is you have to keep it alive. It's important for me to try to retain something of that. Of course, at the end, it is fixed.
I think that's a bit unusual to work like this, but I think it's quite effective.
There are industrial questions at work in this. I work on very small projects, actually, and they maybe have a certain resonance in the world, but they are concretely and also in terms of budgets, usually very small projects. And there's a conscious decision. If you work on bigger projects, then it's much more specialized, the work. So you are going to be hired to work for 6 weeks on the dialogues of the work and nothing else. Yeah, or I've been hired at times to do all the door opens and closed of a film. Yeah, okay, great, and you get very good at it actually. But then you don't have the general picture of it. And for me, that's how I am interested in picture editing, in filmmaking, in thinking about the project, because I'm not interested in the sound as such. The point is not the sound or the music or the editing or whatever. The point is, what are we trying to convey, what form we are developing all together with the image, with the sound. For me, I get back to that. It has to breathe. I was actually very, very happy to be called by people like Andrew Cutting. Somebody like that I can work with, because firstly, we're going to discuss and argue and shout at each other occasionally. There's this kind of handicraft approach, like things are not very big. They are a bit like, and sometimes they're a bit clunky, a bit cheap, but they are effective, I think, I hope.
This kind of methodology, that is sort of no methodology, but it's finally methodology. Yeah, it's very interesting. But at the same time, I mean, you mentioned many times Walter Murch, and it seems a bit paradoxical in the sense, of course, he is a very, very complex personality, but at the same time, he's the one that created this rule of 6, and that's a rule. Do you use it?
As an inspiration, it's in the back of my mind. I've read that, I've absorbed that. It's like, all these things that during developing your learning and reading and absorbing during your life, basically, you absorb all these things and they shape your way of working. Completely. I don't think it's paradoxical, actually, and also I don't think what I'm describing is non-methodology. I think it's very much of a methodology. It's just not a methodology which, in a way, refuses to compartmentalize this is this and that is that, because, in a way, I want the types of sound to be able to switch roles, switch positions, etc., etc. So, of course, they keep their fundamental specifics, but it's all what you know, it's all what I know, what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've discussed, etc., with everyone. And also the way to sort of catch the little moment where you think, now I have an idea. Like when you walk in the street, suddenly you think of something and you think, okay, I better write it somewhere because it's going to go. My methodology is a bit like that. At some point, slowly, it becomes something very integrated, united, and consistent. But not by design. My practice is really like discuss turning points, discuss moments, and try things. Yeah.
So what is interesting is actually the orders, not the rules,
exactly.
But the order. You will agree that, for example, emotion has to be the first, for example.
No, after discussing with various people, I've now decided that I will avoid the word emotion in my practice. I had a very good friend when I was starting to do some teaching. I had a long discussion with her, and she was saying, you know what, the emotion is one's own business, it's not your business. So you give the people what you want, etc., and what they do and what their emotion is their problem, not yours. And I thought, okay, that's actually a really good point. The rules that Murch is talking about are really coming from the classical editing doxa. The angles have to be like that, etc., I don't know, ever since I've been in this, which is, like late 90s, say, all these things were already like really attacked. I mean, they had been attacked long before, but like they were not really even taught in film schools. He is reacting to his time, really, when he does these kind of things. Not to say that they don't apply, of course they apply to a point, but I think, jump cuts, all sorts of aesthetics and methods have been sort of used and become completely standard, let's say acceptable and part of the normal baggage of what you do. And so I don't really think in those terms very much. But the thing with the emotion, I have a sort of a tactile approach to those things, I would say. My thing is, if something moves me or touches me, it will touch somebody else as well, in whatever way, and not in the same way as me, but it will. Yeah, and that's how I work. How we react to sound in particular, but to everything, but to sound, is completely coming from our history. our private sound archive, our childhood, our experiences. Ever since we were born, we accumulate this kind of sound vocabulary. Languages, of course, etc. When I use one sound, it resonates with me for all sorts of reasons, many reasons. For these kind of reasons, on me, they will sort of translate to the other according to his or her baggage and experience. I'm more than happy that he or she will feel something pretty different, experience another emotion.
Mer should use this expression of anticipate the audience emotion in order to control. It's really this classical attitude in the, probably Hitchcock was a master in his American moment, this idea of audience. It's the very question of cinema, and we have to know the psychology of the audience, etc. I like the idea, your idea that actually we are more, I could say, in an attitude to propose something. I mean, you propose your vision. Mm-hmm. You are not an alien. I mean, you are not.
No, exactly.
So editing as a proposal.
Yeah, for me, it's exactly that. It is exactly a proposal. I propose. I don't mean either to be right or to control anything, because that's something that I particularly dislike, is the idea, this sort of demiurgic idea that we can control the audience, because we cannot, and that's how it should be. Well, of course, it's also ideological, of course. I refuse to control. I want to propose something to the thought and to the feeling of the people. So for me, as I said earlier, for me, they are like really snippets of meanings, as small as they might be. A dog bark in the distance says something. It's a little comment, it can be a joke, it can be funny, whatever, but it sort of articulates and it proposes things, indeed. And then you read it according to your background, to where you're coming from, to your anxieties or desires or whatever. And it's fine. It's something that Murch and many others have also talked about a lot, is the multiplicity, the ambiguity of sound. It's just like we tend to try to treat the sound not for saying this is a footstep, this is a dog, this is a whatever. Much more in the sort of musique concrète approach, objet sonore, these kind of things, which is there's an entity of power, of energy, of sound energy, which has a certain array of characteristics, and we use it for that, not for its source. And of course, in cinema, we sort of play in between. So that's also one of the ambiguities. Do I want to hear the rhythm of the person running like a drum beat, say, or am I interested in hearing that it's a person running? It's both, and it depends how you interpret or in which direction you go. Are you going for the recognition of the source of the sound, or are you going for something else? Because I also work very often with people who use extended lengths in their films, etc., etc. So one of the psychological mechanisms of that is, in the beginning, you recognize what's going on, you identify it, and then, well, it's not changing, it's continuing. And so then you have to reconsider and draw a different type of line in it. And if it's successful, which it's not always successful, but when it's successful, you start to have a multiplicity of lines of reading of the same construct of image and sound. It's more like, it's not controlling, but it is like driving a boat a little bit, like steering a bit in this direction or in that direction.
Work in the casualty ward teaches a nurse to be alert and self-reliant. She must be prepared for every emergency.
Disease as old as history itself.
The nurse has reason to be proud. It's due in no small measure to her that her patient will soon be back in the outside world once more.
Shut the doors. They're coming through the windows. Shut the windows. They're coming through the doors. Shut the doors. They're coming through the windows.
The question of improvisation, I think that is also an element, an ingredient of working in editing. Very often people say, okay, at the end we can say everything about editing, but at the end it's a question of intuition. And finally we have just to follow a line. And I was thinking about improvisation even because of Van der Kuyken, this is another reference for you. Mm. How much in your editing work is important?
I don't know, but the question of improvisation is... I'm not sure actually. Of course, there is an element of that, but what is, our life is an improvisation in a way. No? I think the word has a connotation which is a bit misleading. After jazz, after sort of music, jam sessions and all that. The idea is you just go there, you do whatever you feel, and it's great because it's improvised. I totally disagree with that. I was going to say, but I actually am already correcting myself, but I was going to say that an improvisation in that kind of context is completely fed with your... le bagage, comment dire en français? What you carry with you, with your past, with your history, with your aesthetics, with your thoughts, with your concerns. And with, of course, the curiosities of the moment, all these things. Your improvisation can go like that, and it can become something productive or fruitful. It's tricky to say because very good musicians who are very trained on their instruments are terrible at improvisation, some of them. Yeah? They just can't do it because the automatism kicks in immediately. And, I've suffered from that. I've done a lot of music at some point, and when I was trying to do something more free, I had to change the instrument because that one, it was going to be always the same kind of, l'éthique. And in sound, you could say the same, or in film editing, maybe. But what I'm trying to say is you follow intuitions, you do improvise, but a lot of the work is also identifying. It's not following any of the lines, because there are always many lines possible, is identifying them, first of all. Identifying the lines is actually the most important. Once you have identified them, you go back and you rework them and you comb them, maybe.
You work a lot with space, with spatialization of sound, precisely with editing, because just the very fact to edit some sound, to put some different layers is already a question of space.
No, exactly.
And then there is the second question, of course, of putting the sound in the space, when in the screening, so that's another question.
Exactly.
But just then...
To talk about that, you have to distinguish exactly about those things. A sound that you record anywhere carries a space. And when you reproduce it, when you hear it, it creates a space. Yeah, it creates the space of the place it has been recorded in, and it creates an image of that space, a virtual image of that space, where you listen to it. Whether it is through a little tiny radio loudspeaker or through a big system in a cinema, the fundamental is the same. The way it sounds is not the same, but what is actually happening is the same, because the space is there already. To be provocative, for me, my favorite way of using multi-channel systems is certainly not the cinema one. Is the one that you use in theater or in musique contemporaine, which is having different types of speakers placed wherever appropriate in the room. The thing with cinema, because it's a standardized medium, and you have to have one file that is being projected all over the world the same way, which has its qualities, because then, you make something and it will more or less be reproduced, more or less, okay? But in terms of purely aesthetical and creative potential. It's much more interesting to have a little speaker hanging here in the middle of the room and a big speaker over there and play the balance between the two. It's more interesting. But that's not what we do in cinema.
So this is sort of montage, of course, montage in the space, but on the editing table, in the very moment of editing, so is the moment where you can create space or you can think, especially.
Yes. Because this is a bit theoretical, the way I'm talking now. Concretely, firstly, whenever I put a sound on the timeline, as I said before, it carries its own space, which I have to consider whether that space works or not. Actually, you cannot get rid of the space of the sound if you want to, so which some people occasionally says, can we not take that out? I don't think so. So I have to consider that and articulate the spaces at the editing stage, and then maybe at a different layer of the work and of the timeline as well, consciously create the various spaces, the spaces of the exterior mountain, the spaces of the night in the room. It's a totally different feeling, a different amplitude.
You mentioned the theater situation and the cinema situation, and there is something in between. That is the installation, the multi-channel installation, where it's cinema in a sense, so it's moving images in a sense, but it's you have, for example, 3 screens, a gallery space, we have 3 screens. Yeah. So is it something challenging, or, there is something specific or something that you like particularly in...
Gallery space is not made for sound, it's made for image. It sounds like, I won't say the word, but, it's terrible. There are many considerations. Firstly, sound is all-pervasive. If I say, la, okay, you find it funny, maybe. Nice. If I do that 200 times in a loop, like in a gallery, you go completely mad. It's unbearable. Yeah. Now, if you have one person who makes a piece with sound in a gallery and another one as well, then it's the war between the two. Doesn't work. The practical reality is usually in a gallery space, you're in a bad place to make. For me, it's a nightmare because I can do as well as I can in my studio with the artist, and then you go there and you say the speakers are bad, the room is bad, it's noisy, and there's another piece which makes noise just like 5 meters away. So, it's very depressing. The potential is great, and there are amazing things that have been done, and so it is possible. Just like, of course, now we can talk about economy. In cinema, even when we work with small budgets like myself, everybody knows that you have to have a decent work on sound and a decent place to play the thing. And the standardization of the cinema, the good side of it is you will reproduce your stuff more or less the way it was, yeah? Now, in art, even if there is money, usually nobody has any clue that actually you need to put money in the sound and in the room. I've seen work by John O'Comfra or something like that. The sound is absolutely amazing in the gallery because he is obsessed with that as well, and he's not going to let it go without it being good. But it's not very common.
That was the podcast Tools, Not Rules, Film Explorer's Editing Collection. Interview, Giuseppe Di Salvatore. Editing, Ruth Bettig. Presentation voice, Jeanette Wolf. Production, Film Explorer. Tools, Not Rules, Film Explorer's Editing Collection was created thanks to a grant from the Department of Film and Media Art, Cultural Basel.